December 24, 1995. Beverly Hills, California. The Christmas lights on North Maple Drive blurred softly through the fog. Most of Los Angeles was either sleeping or stumbling home from parties. But inside one dimly lit house, an 78-year-old man sat alone in his favorite chair, a glass of scotch in his hand, the television flickering in front of him. On the screen, a much younger version of that same man was singing, "Everybody Loves Somebody." He watched himself move across the stage, confident, smooth, immortal. Then he looked down at his own hands. They were thin now, fragile. His voice was almost gone. His friends were gone. His son was gone. Dean Martin took a shallow breath, coughed, and reached for the phone. He dialed a number he knew by heart. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. On the other end, a woman picked up, half asleep, voice thick with concern. "Dad, is everything okay?" Dean hesitated. For a second, he thought about hanging up, about pretending he'd dialed the wrong number, about saying something light and easy, the way he'd done his entire life. Instead, he said 3 words that when his family repeated them the next day would break everyone who heard them. "I'm so tired." He didn't mean tired like "I need to sleep." He meant something deeper. Tired of fighting to breathe. Tired of waking up in a world without his son. Tired of pretending he was still Dean Martin, the king of cool, when inside he felt like a man who had been slowly dying since March 21, 1987. To understand what those 3 words really meant, you have to understand everything that came before that phone call. You have to understand how a man like Dean Martin, who seemed untouchable, unbreakable, invincible, ended his life in a small, quiet room, whispering that he was tired. And you have to understand why, for the people who loved him, hearing those words felt like losing him twice. Part 1. The man who never let anyone see him bleed. For most of his life, Dean Martin looked like the one man in Hollywood who had everything figured out. He wasn't desperate like some stars clinging to fame. He wasn't volatile like others, exploding in public. He floated through life with a drink in his hand, a smile on his face, and an attitude that said, "Relax, none of this really matters." People bought it. They believed he didn't care. They believed he was naturally cool, naturally loose, naturally unbothered. What almost nobody understood was this: that cool was armor. The jokes were armor. The glass of scotch was armor. The slouched posture, the lazy grin, the constant teasing, armor. Underneath all of it was a man who felt everything. Dean Martin didn't like to talk about his pain. He didn't like to show it. He didn't even like to admit it to himself. When his first marriage fell apart, he worked more. When critics attacked his partnership with Jerry Lewis, he smiled and walked away. When people said Sinatra was the real star of the Rat Pack and Dean was the sidekick, he shrugged and made fun of himself. He had one rule, on stage and off. No matter what happens, no matter who dies, who leaves, who betrays, you never let the audience see you bleed. That rule worked, for decades, until the day his son's plane hit a mountain. Part 2. The call that never really ended on the morning of March 21, 1987, the day his life split into before and after. Dean Martin answered another phone call. It was routine, ordinary. 30 seconds, maybe a minute. His son, Captain Dean Paul Dino Martin, called from March Air Force Base. "Hey, Dad. Hey, kid. You good?" They didn't talk about death or fate or anything grand. They talked like fathers and sons talk when both assume there's always another day. "How's the flying? How's the schedule? I'm proud of you. I love you." Nothing about that call sounded final. There was no tremor in his son's voice, no foreshadowing, no cinematic, perfectly written goodbye. Just a casual, "Love you, Dad." Dean said it back. Then he hung up. Hours later, on a stage in Las Vegas, he would be handed another phone. This time, the voice on the line would tell him that his son's F-4 Phantom had disappeared into the San Bernardino Mountains. There were no survivors. In a strange way, for Dean Martin, those 2 calls merged into one. The last time he heard his son say, "I love you," and the first time he heard the words, "Your son is dead." From that night on, every phone call felt different. The phone became a weapon. It could deliver joy. It could also deliver the worst kind of news. He picked it up anyway, because he had to. He picked it up when Frank Sinatra called, trying to comfort him. He picked it up when Sammy Davis Jr. called, offering sympathy, masking his own fear of mortality. He picked it up when his daughters called, begging him to eat, to go outside, to try to live again. He answered the phone. He talked. He joked. Sometimes he even laughed. But a part of him had stopped that night in Las Vegas, just as surely as he'd stopped mid-song. And for the last 8 years of his life, every call he answered sat in the shadow of one he could never make. He could not call his son back. Part 3. The Slow Collapse of a Legend. After Dino's death, Dean Martin didn't fall apart all at once. He didn't scream in public. He didn't destroy his house. He didn't go on television and confess his heartbreak. Instead, he did the thing he'd always done best. He retreated, curtains drawn, television on, drink in hand, old tapes of his son playing tennis, home movies, memories. People who visited him in those years say the same things over and over. He was there, but he wasn't there. It was like talking to a man who lived in 2 time zones, one in the present, one in the past. When he looked at you, you could see he was also looking at someone who wasn't in the room. He tried, briefly, to be Dean Martin again. In 1988, he agreed to go on tour with Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., the big reunion everybody wanted, the ultimate Rat Pack comeback. From the outside, it looked like a dream. 3 legends, 1 stage, 1 last run. From the inside, it felt wrong. Backstage, Frank could see it, Sammy could see it, the band could see it. Dean walked on stage. The lights hit him. The crowd roared. He smiled. He sang. But in his head, one thought kept repeating, "He should be here. My boy should be here to see this." Every applause felt like an accusation. Every laugh felt like a lie. On one of those nights, he turned to Frank and said quietly, "I can't pretend to be happy anymore." Frank looked at his old friend carefully. This was not Dean's usual fake complaint. This was something else. A week later, Dean quit the tour. The world spun its own story. He's tired. He's sick. He's over it. Those things were partly true, but the larger truth was simpler and crueler. He could no longer be Dean Martin on cue. The mask was too heavy. The cost was too high. And so, he went home. Part 4. The House That Became a Shrine. By the early 1990s, Dean Martin's Beverly Hills home didn't feel like a star's mansion. It felt like a museum, not a public one, with clean glass and neat labels. A private one, dark, quiet, haunting. Pictures of Dean and Dino on the walls, trophies, rackets, frames on the piano, clippings in drawers. He didn't like visitors. He didn't want pity. He didn't want to talk it out. Friends described walking in and feeling like time had stopped somewhere around 1987. His daughter, Deanna, would come by with food. Sometimes she'd find him asleep in his chair, the TV playing an old movie, the volume low, an untouched drink by his side. Sometimes he'd talk. Sometimes he'd make a joke. Sometimes he'd barely speak at all. If you asked him about his career, he'd change the subject. If you asked him about Frank or Jerry, he'd shrug. If you mentioned his son, everything in him would either shut down or overflow. There weren't many spaces left in the world where Dean Martin could tell the truth. A small, quiet room behind closed curtains was one of them. A phone line was another. Part 5. The body surrenders, the heart won't. Decades of smoking finally caught up to him. The man who used to walk from one end of a stage to the other, drink in hand, barely breaking a sweat, now got winded walking from his chair to the kitchen. Doctors called it emphysema, chronic lung disease. His friends called it what it was, his body giving up on a man whose heart had been broken for years. He was diagnosed, treated, advised. Stop smoking, Dean. Cut back on the drinking. You need to get out of the house more. Try physical therapy. He listened. He nodded. He smiled that same old smile. Then he went home, closed the door, and sank a little deeper into his chair. The phone became his last real connection. He couldn't go out much anymore. He didn't want to be seen sick, frail, diminished. He didn't want people to have that image of him. So instead, people came to him through the wire: old friends, music business associates, family, and one man he'd loved like a brother. Part 6. The brother left standing. Frank Sinatra did not know what to do with a broken Dean Martin. This was the man Frank had leaned on when he was angry, drunk, humiliated, exhausted. This was the man who had stood next to him when the mob was angry, when the press was vicious, when marriages fell apart. Dean was supposed to be the unbreakable one, the clown who knew better than to take anything too seriously, the guy who could turn any disaster into a joke and any heartbreak into a song. But now the roles were reversed. Frank called him, sometimes from the road, sometimes from his own house, sometimes from backstage minutes before walking out to sing My Way for the 1,000th time. "Dino, how you holding up?" "I'm fine, pal." "You don't sound fine." "I'm still here, aren't I?" Frank didn't push. He knew better. You don't demand emotional vulnerability from a man who has spent 60 years hiding his wounds behind a smile. So instead, they talked around the pain. About the old days, about the clubs that no longer existed, about Sammy's passing, about Jerry, about lousy new singers who didn't know what phrasing meant. Frank tried to keep Dean tethered to the world, even from a distance, even through a phone line. But with every year, the calls got shorter. Not because they loved each other less, because there was less of Dean to hold on to. The lungs were failing, the body was shrinking, the will was thinning. By late 1995, Christmas was coming, and everybody around Dean could feel it. He was running out of time. Part 7. Christmas Eve, the night before the end. December 24th, 1995, was not a glamorous Hollywood Christmas for Dean Martin. No wild party, no glittering tree with dozens of guests, no Rat Pack reunion, just a quiet house, a dim lamp, a television playing old movies, and an old man who had outlived too many people he loved. He wasn't completely alone. Family checked in. Nurses checked in. Someone made sure the house was warm, that his medication was nearby. But emotionally, he was on his own island. There comes a point in grief that even the most loving family cannot cross, a place where only you and your memories live. Dean was there. He dozed, woke up, coughed, reached for water, tried to watch television, changed the channel, turned the volume down. At some point that night, the weight of silence became heavier than his fear of vulnerability. He looked at the phone. He thought about who to call. Frank? Maybe. But Frank had his own health problems now, his own ghosts, his own battles. An old friend? What would he say? "Merry Christmas, I'm dying." So he did what men like him do at the end of long, complicated lives. He called his family. Part 8. The Last Call. It wasn't a dramatic scene out of a movie. There was no thunder, no pounding score, no perfect cinematic framing, just a ringing phone in a dark house, and another ringing phone on a nightstand somewhere across town. The second phone was answered by his daughter. She later said she could tell, from the very first hello, that something was wrong. "Dad?" "Yeah, honey." "You okay? Do you need anything? Should I come over?" He could have lied. He could have said, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just wanted to hear your voice." He could have made a joke, deflected, dodged. That was his nature, his training, his habit. Instead, he paused. Silence hummed between them. In that silence lived every performance he'd ever given, every mask he'd ever worn, every time he'd said, "I'm all right," when he was anything but. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Dean Martin chose not to play Dean Martin. He chose to tell the truth. "I'm so tired." 3 simple words. No poetry, no philosophizing, no final speech. Just a confession. She knew he didn't mean, "I want to go to bed." She heard what he really meant. "I'm tired of hurting. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of living in this body and this grief in this house with these memories. I'm tired of waking up every day in a world where my son doesn't exist." "Dad," her voice broke. "Do you want me to come over? I can be there in 20 minutes. He hesitated. There was a strange gentleness in his reply, a softness his children rarely heard from the father who'd always seemed slightly distant, always half in another world. "No, sweetheart. You stay. Enjoy your Christmas. But I just wanted to hear your voice." He said a few more things, small things. "Thank you. I love you. Good night." No one pressed him. No one forced him to say more. But when he hung up, his daughter sat there, phone in hand, staring at the wall. "I'm so tired," she knew. He wasn't just calling to talk. He was calling to say goodbye. Part 9. Christmas morning. On the morning of December 25th, 1995, the world woke up to Christmas. Children tore open presents. Families gathered around breakfast tables. Airports filled. Church bells rang. Somewhere in Beverly Hills, Dean Martin's house was quiet. Too quiet. Sometime that morning, he died of acute respiratory failure. That was the official cause printed on the paperwork. But those who had watched him shrink, watched him retreat, watched him carry the weight of a dead son and a dead era on his shoulders for 8 years, used different words. He died of a broken heart. He just couldn't carry it anymore. He was tired. When the call went out to his family, to his friends, to Frank, to the industry, it felt like the end of something larger than one man. The end of a certain kind of cool. The end of a Hollywood no one would ever truly see again. The end of the Rat Pack era. But for his family, the pain was more intimate. They remembered the man on television. They remembered the star, and they remembered the phone call. "I'm so tired." Those 3 words echoed in every room where the news was shared. He had told them. They had heard him. And now it was too late to tell him they understood. Part 10. The 3 words that broke everyone. For a long time, Dean Martin's fans didn't know about that last phone call. They knew the public facts. He died on Christmas Day. He was 78. He'd been sick. He hadn't recovered from his son's death. But they didn't know what he'd said the night before. They didn't know how simple and how devastating those 3 words were. When the family finally shared pieces of that story, never as a public stunt, never as a headline, but in bits and pieces, interviews and conversations, it hit people in a particular way. Not like gossip, not like trivia, not like celebrity last words. It hit like recognition. Because "I'm so tired" is not the sentence of a movie star. It's the sentence of a human being at the end of a long, hard road. Everyone who has ever watched someone fade away slowly through illness, grief, loneliness, heartbreak knows that sentence. They've heard it, or they've thought it. "I'm so tired, tired of fighting, tired of pretending, tired of carrying pain no one else can truly understand." That's what broke people. Not that Dean Martin died. We all knew he would, eventually. What broke people was realizing that beneath 50 years of effortless cool, there had always been a man who felt things so deeply that when it became too much, the only honest thing left to say was, "I'm so tired." Part 11. The other 3 words. He said too late. There's another layer to those 3 words. In his private life, Dean Martin was not always the perfect father. He worked constantly. He was on the road. He did shows, movies, records, TV specials. He drank. He kept his emotions locked away. His kids loved him. They were proud of him. But some of them also grew up with a sense that their father loved them from a distance. He showed up sometimes. He disappeared sometimes. He wasn't always present, not the way an ordinary dad is. After Dino died, that distance haunted him. Friends say he carried a quiet, gnawing guilt. Had he told his son enough times that he was proud of him? Had he hugged him enough? Had he been too busy being Dean Martin to just be dad? The last phone call before his death wasn't the first time he'd said, "I'm so tired." He'd said it before, in whispers, in half-jokes, in sighs at the end of long days. But what his family remembers from those final years are 3 other words, ones he used more and more as he got older. "I love you." He said it to his children. He said it to his friends. He even said it, awkwardly, to a few people he'd previously only joked with. For a man who had spent a lifetime avoiding sentimentality, Those words were harder to say than any song he'd ever sung. In a way, his last real sentence, "I'm so tired," sat right next to the words he'd been learning to say in his final years. "I love you." One described his exhaustion. The other described his regret. Together, they painted the truth. He was a man who had loved big and late and lost too much to keep carrying. Part 12. What we hear when we listen. If you listen to recordings of Dean Martin now, really listen, not just as background music in an Italian restaurant. You'll hear something you might have missed before. In the easy swing of "That's Amore," in the tenderness of "Return to Me," in the melancholy undercurrent of "Everybody Loves Somebody," you'll hear a man who understood longing, who understood loneliness, who understood the sharp ache of wanting something you're not sure you deserve. The world wanted him to be the carefree clown, the unbothered crooner, the man who never took anything seriously. But you don't sing like that if nothing ever hurts you. You don't deliver heartbreak lines with that kind of casual sincerity unless you've been there yourself. That's what makes those last 3 words so powerful. "I'm so tired" wasn't a punchline. It wasn't a bit. It wasn't a line from a script. It was the quiet, unmasked voice of a man who had spent his entire life entertaining other people, finally admitting, to his family, and maybe to himself, that the show was over. If you've ever had someone you love say those words at the end of a long fight, with cancer, with depression, with grief, you know why it breaks you. Because buried inside, "I'm so tired," is a question they're too kind to ask out loud. Is it okay if I stop now? Part 13. The answer. He never heard. The tragedy of Dean Martin's final phone call is not only that it happened, it's that he never got to hear the answer his family would have given him if they'd known it was the last time. If they had realized, in that exact moment, that this wasn't just an old man complaining about his health or his lungs or his age. If they'd known it was the last confession of a father who had carried too much for too long, they might have said something like this: "Dad, it's okay to rest. You did enough. You gave enough. You were enough. You don't have to be strong anymore. You don't have to be Dean Martin anymore. You can just be Dad, and you can let go." But life almost never gives us the perfect words at the perfect time. We stumble. We guess. We try to be optimistic when we should be honest, and honest when we should be gentle. Dean hung up the phone. Maybe he felt a little lighter, having finally admitted how he felt. Maybe he felt guilty for worrying his daughter. We don't know. We only know this: by the time the sun rose on Christmas morning, he was gone. Part 14. The real legacy of his last words. When people talk about Dean Martin today, they usually mention the same things: the voice, the movies, the Rat Pack, the laughs, the drinking bit, the tuxedo, the charm. Those things are real. They're worth celebrating. But if you zoom in on the end of his life, on that small, dimly lit room, on that last phone call, on those 3 defeated words, you see a different kind of legacy. You see what happens when a man spends a lifetime being cool instead of being honest. You see what happens when grief is swallowed instead of shared. You see what happens when the world praises you for being unbothered, even when you are shattered inside. Dean Martin's final phone call is not just a sad story about a famous singer dying. It's a warning. About the cost of always being fine. About the cost of never saying, "I'm not okay." About the cost of living behind a role so convincingly that by the time you take it off, there's almost no time left. And it's also, strangely, a kind of permission. If a man like Dean Martin, Hollywood legend, king of cool, professional heart hider, could, at the very end, pick up the phone and say, "I'm so tired," then maybe the rest of us can say it a little sooner, to a friend, to a partner, to a parent, to ourselves. Maybe we don't have to wait until the last night, the last call, the last breath to admit that we're carrying too much. Part 15. The Last Image. There's no video of Dean Martin's final night, no recording of that last call, no photograph of him holding the phone, light from the television flickering across his face. All we have are pieces, memories, testimonies, a timeline. So we build the scene in our minds. An elderly man, body failing, heart heavy, sitting alone on Christmas Eve. The glow of the television painting old shadows across his walls. A glass of scotch within reach, more habit than pleasure now. Photographs of his children, a picture of his son in uniform. Laughter from a different house, far away, where a family is trying to celebrate while worrying about him. He looks at the phone. He knows what he's lost. He knows what he can't get back. He knows what tomorrow might bring, or take away. He dials anyway. A voice answers, a familiar voice, a voice that still anchors him to the world. Dad? And for one brief, honest moment, the mask falls away completely. No jokes, no lines, no performance, just a tired man at the end of a long road, finally saying the quiet part out loud. I'm so tired. Those 3 words broke everyone who loved him. But they also did something else. They reminded them, and us, that behind every legend, every icon, every cool persona, there is a human being who feels everything. A human being who, in the end, wants what we all want, to be heard, to be loved, and when the time comes, to be allowed to rest.